The snowstorm that swept across Toronto the following week seemed to mirror the chaos inside Amelia's life. The city slowed under the weight of it, traffic snarled. Sidewalks disappeared under drifts, and the lakefront froze into jagged slabs of ice. For Amelia, the storm was both a cloak and a revelation. The world outside became muffled, quieter, almost as if urging her to confront the noise within. One night, she lit a single lamp in her apartment and began reviewing every binder page by page, hour by hour, until her eyes blurred. She cross-referenced signatures, compared dates, and highlighted patterns. Her stepfather's meticulous greed became clearer with each line she traced. He had timed withdrawals to coincide with her business trips, filed loan applications when she was out of the province, even mimicked her unique looped A from high school signatures her mother must have saved in old keepsakes. It was deliberate, calculated, and cruelly intimate. What cut the deepest was the realization that this wasn't just financial theft, it was erasure. They had studied her life so closely that they could replicate it on paper, bending her identity into their own currency. It was as if they had written a parallel biography for her, one built not on hard work, but on deception, each forged signature another false chapter. Amelia began to notice the physical toll it took. Her collarbone ached where Victor had once gripped her too tightly, a bruise long faded but still vivid in memory. She startled at small sounds, the clatter of mail through the slot, the ring of her phone, even the creak of pipes in her apartment. Anxiety seeped into her bones, cold and heavy. She had to force herself to breathe deeply, to remember that vigilance was not weakness, but survival. But beneath the exhaustion, something else pulsed stronger each day: clarity. She was no longer stumbling in confusion. The puzzle was taking shape, and she was no longer a piece to be moved. She was becoming the hand that rearranged the board. On the final night of December, while fireworks exploded faintly over Nathan Phillips Square, Amelia stood by her window watching the city shimmer. She thought of the thousands celebrating below, people hugging, kissing, starting fresh. She felt none of that joy, but she felt something sharper, more enduring resolve. The coming year would not be about festivity or tradition, it would be about justice. She wrote her resolution in her journal, the words etched hard into the page as if pressure alone could carve them into permanence. This ends with truth exposed. This ends with them held accountable. This ends with me free. The following morning, she walked into a stationery shop on Bloor Street and bought 3 identical leather-bound journals. She labeled them with a steady hand: evidence, strategy, and reflection. Into the first, she began transferring every number, every date, every reference from her binders. Into the second, she outlined steps: contact authorities, seek legal counsel, secure allies. Into the third, she wrote about her father, his voice, his lessons, his unwavering sense of fairness. That journal was her anchor, a reminder that her story did not begin with betrayal and would not end with it. As she closed the covers and stacked them neatly on her desk, Amelia understood that part 1 of her battle was complete. She had uncovered the fracture, felt the full force of devastation, and chosen not to collapse beneath it. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city blanketed in silence, but she no longer feared the quiet. It was not emptiness, it was space to rebuild. Outside her window, the lake lay frozen, its surface glittering in the morning sun. For the first time since the bank incident, Amelia allowed herself to believe in possibility. Beneath the ice, water still moved, restless and alive. So too did she. The fracture was real, irreparable, but from it, a new foundation could be poured, one forged from truth rather than illusion. Amelia straightened her spine, breathed in the crisp winter air seeping through the cracks of her window, and whispered the words aloud this time. They will not break me. This is only the beginning. And with that vow, The curtain fell on the first act of her ordeal. Ahead waited the labyrinth of law, the venom of retaliation, and the fire of confrontation. But Amelia Cross was no longer merely a victim. She was the architect of her own justice. The new year dawned cold and merciless. Toronto lay under a crust of ice, the sidewalks salted into slush, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Yet for Amelia Cross, the frost was no longer a reflection of despair. It was a sharpening stone, grinding her grief into something harder, something unyielding. She began with what she knew the paper trail. Night after night, she sat at her dining table with the 3 journals she had purchased. The evidence journals swelled with new entries, bank statements she requested, credit card bills addressed to her name but sent to a post office box she had never owned, denial letters citing delinquent accounts. Each document was another crack in the facade her mother and stepfather had carefully constructed. The strategy journal grew slowly but steadily. Amelia mapped out potential steps: file a fraud report with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, alert Equifax and TransUnion, seek legal counsel specializing in financial abuse. She wrote in careful bullet points, the kind that had always organized her work projects. Now, those same skills became her armor. She no longer saw the situation as an overwhelming blur, but as a series of tasks, steps toward justice. Yet it was the reflection journal that saved her most nights. In its pages, she poured memories of her father, the woodworking projects they had built together in their garage, his laugh echoing against the cedar walls, his insistence that honesty was the only true wealth. Those memories reminded her that blood alone did not define family. Integrity did. And in that measure, her father lived on in her, even as her mother betrayed her. Still, Amelia knew that journals and papers alone could not carry her through this storm. She needed allies. That realization came one bitter morning when she returned from work to find her apartment door ajar. Her heart thudded violently as she pushed it open. The place had been ransacked, drawers overturned, papers scattered, her meticulously kept binders torn apart. Whoever had come wasn't searching for valuables, they were searching for evidence. She fell to her knees in the wreckage, gathering papers with trembling hands. Some were missing, but by sheer instinct, she had hidden copies of the most damning documents at her office and in cloud storage. The intruders hadn't found them. Still, the violation pierced her deeply. Her home, once her sanctuary, had become another battlefield. That night, Amelia called her younger brother, Nathan. He was the only person she trusted without hesitation. Nathan lived 2 hours away in Kingston, working long hours as a carpenter, his hands rough from labor but his heart steady. She hadn't wanted to burden him, but the break-in left her no choice. When she told him about the forged documents, the debts, the theft of their father's insurance money, his silence on the line was heavy but not disbelieving. He came the very next day, driving through a snowstorm to stand by her side. Nathan's presence steadied her like nothing else could. He combed through the papers with her, pointing out patterns she hadn't noticed. Transactions clustered around her business trips, loan applications filed when she was out of province. He had an eye for detail honed by years of measuring wood and angles, and he treated her evidence like blueprints for rebuilding. Together, they began to see the scope of the fraud more clearly. But Nathan brought more than analysis. He brought validation. When Amelia's thoughts spiraled into guilt, was she cruel for turning against her mother? Was she heartless for wanting justice? Nathan reminded her of the truth. Their father would never have allowed this. Their father's legacy had already been stolen once. It was Amelia's duty to reclaim it. It was Nathan who urged her to seek legal counsel. Through a coworker, he connected her with a Toronto-based lawyer, Claire Whitfield, who specialized in financial fraud and family exploitation cases. The first time Amelia stepped into Claire's office, she felt both terrified and relieved. The walls were lined with case files and framed newspaper clippings of victories against corporations and predators. Claire listened without judgment as Amelia spread out her binders, her voice trembling but steady. When Claire finally spoke, her words carried the weight of certainty. This was a textbook case of identity theft, aggravated by familial betrayal. Claire's advice was methodical. Document everything. File police reports. Secure restraining measures. Prepare for retaliation. Because people who commit fraud within families often escalate when exposed. Amelia wrote every instruction into her strategy journal, her pen pressing so hard the words indented through the pages. For the first time since the bank incident, she felt less like a drowning victim and more like a survivor learning to swim in stormy waters. The investigation widened. Credit bureaus confirmed multiple accounts Amelia had never opened. A bank officer quietly admitted that a loan officer named Bernard, a longtime acquaintance of Victor, had overridden several verification flags. Claire explained that collusion like this was rare but devastating because it allowed fraud to persist unchecked for years. With Bernard's cooperation, the case grew stronger, but it also grew more dangerous. Victor and Lillian escalated their tactics. They left voicemails dripping with manipulation. "You're tearing this family apart. You'll regret this." Anonymous letters appeared in Amelia's mailbox, warning her to stop. Once, she found the words "Family First" scrawled in red paint across the windshield of her car. The intimidation was blatant, but instead of breaking her, it fueled her. Each act of cruelty became another entry in her evidence journal, another thread in the rope she would eventually use to bind them legally. It was during one of these long nights of documentation that Nathan stumbled upon a hidden file in their father's old desk, which he had kept in storage. Inside were statements from the life insurance trust confirmation that Amelia's $20,000 inheritance had been diverted 3 months after her 25th birthday. The account number led to a shell account tied directly to Lillian's name. The discovery sliced Amelia open all over again. This wasn't just fraud. This was betrayal of the most sacred kind. The money wasn't large compared to the debts piled in her name, but it was her father's last act of protection, stolen and buried by the very woman who should have safeguarded it. Amelia wept that night for the first time in weeks. She wept not from fear, but from mourning, the mourning of a daughter who realized her mother's love had always been conditional, transactional, weaponized. When the tears subsided, she felt a new clarity. This wasn't about salvaging family ties. Those ties had already been severed by lies. This was about justice, pure and unflinching. Claire guided her through the next steps. They filed affidavits. They froze suspicious accounts. They contacted the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center and supplied detailed reports. Amelia's workplace became her refuge. Her office desk a second war room filled with neatly labeled folders and secured backups. Her co-workers noticed her fatigue but not her battle. And she preferred it that way. This was not a story for casual sympathy. It was a war of survival. By late January, the walls began to close in on Victor and Lillian. The bank flagged multiple accounts for fraud. Collection agencies contacted Amelia, only to be redirected to Claire. Bernard, the compromised loan officer, admitted under oath that Victor had provided him with old samples of Amelia's handwriting. The puzzle was snapping into focus, piece by damning piece. But with each victory came retaliation. One evening, Amelia returned home to find her apartment door splintered, her laptop smashed, her printer in shards across the floor, spray painted on her kitchen wall. In letters tall enough to tower over her were the words, "Traitor." Her hands shook as she called Nathan, who arrived within the hour with tools and boards to reinforce her door. Claire insisted they report the vandalism immediately, and police officers photographed the scene with clinical detachment. The violation was crushing, but Amelia found herself strangely calm. They had revealed their desperation, and desperation was weakness. Through it all, the bond between Amelia and Nathan deepened. They spent long nights reviewing documents, long mornings strengthening locks and cameras, long afternoons reminding each other of why they fought. Together, they reclaimed fragments of the safety that Victor and Lillian had tried to strip away. By February, Amelia stood taller. She still carried exhaustion in her eyes, but her spine was straight, her voice steadier. The fracture that had once threatened to shatter her completely was calcifying into resolve. She had allies, she had evidence, and she had truth on her side. Yet she knew the storm had only just begun. The real battle, the courtroom, the public exposure, the reckoning still lay ahead, and Victor, cornered and furious, would not go quietly. But Amelia was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkest betrayal, and she was still standing. The awakening had come, and with it, the fire that would carry her into war. By the time March arrived, Toronto had shed its blanket of snow, but not its chill. The sidewalks glistened with meltwater, and the city hummed with the first stirrings of spring. For Amelia, however, the season of renewal felt more like a tightening vice. Each day brought progress in her case, but each step forward was met with equal and opposite retaliation. She was no longer simply fighting for her financial survival. She was fighting for her safety, her sanity, and her right to live without fear. The siege began subtly, with whispers. Her mother reached out to family friends and church members, spinning tales of Amelia's supposed instability. She was painted as the ungrateful daughter, poisoned by ambition, lashing out at the very people who had sacrificed everything for her. Lillian's voice carried weight in those circles. Her crocodile tears convinced many. Amelia began receiving messages from distant relatives and acquaintances, thinly veiled rebukes cloaked as concern. The emotional sabotage cut deeper than she expected. She had braced herself for financial warfare, but not for the sting of social exile. Yet Nathan reminded her of a vital truth: manipulation thrives in silence. They wanted her to shrink, to retreat, to doubt herself. Instead, she leaned further into documentation. Each malicious voicemail, each threatening letter, each defaced wall was catalogued and preserved. Claire, her lawyer, praised her discipline. "They are building your case for you," she said, sliding another envelope of evidence into her growing file. Amelia clung to those words when doubt gnawed at her. The harassment escalated. Her car tires were slashed outside her office one morning, the rubber shredded into ribbons. Security footage captured only the shadow of a figure slipping into the night. A week later, her apartment's mailbox was jammed with photographs torn into pieces, images of her childhood birthdays and school graduations, ripped and defaced. The message was unmistakable: they wanted to destroy not just her present, but her past. Fear became a constant companion. Amelia installed new locks, added cameras, and carried herself through the city with heightened awareness. Every unfamiliar face on the subway, every lingering car outside her building, every phone call from an unknown number triggered adrenaline spikes. Yet amid the fear, she discovered a paradoxical strength. They could unsettle her, but they could not silence her. Each act of intimidation became fuel for her resolve. The case itself grew heavier. Claire uncovered more evidence of collusion within the bank. Bernard, the compromised loan officer, confessed in detail to how Victor had bribed him, using promises of investment shares. He admitted to manually overriding verification systems, approving accounts with forged signatures, and rerouting statements to addresses under Victor's control. His testimony was explosive, but it also painted a portrait of Victor as someone far more calculating and ruthless than Amelia had ever imagined. At the same time, credit bureaus confirmed that Amelia's financial profile had been flagged for high-risk behavior due to the sheer volume of fraudulent accounts. This revelation carried devastating consequences. Amelia's promotion at work, one she had fought for months earlier, was now in jeopardy. Her employer raised concerns about her financial stability, citing it as a risk for someone in a position handling large-scale logistics contracts. Amelia sat through the meeting with a calm face, but inside she was hollowed out. Fraud had bled into every corner of her life. Nathan was furious when she told him, but Amelia refused to despair. Instead, she turned the moment into another line in her strategy. If her professional life was under attack, she would rebuild it alongside her legal case. She began keeping a separate portfolio of her work achievements, preparing to defend her reputation as fiercely as she defended her credit. By April, the case reached a boiling point. Claire filed official criminal charges against Victor for identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy, and against Lillian for complicity. The news, though not yet public, sent shockwaves through Amelia's private world. She felt both liberated and terrified. Filing charges meant no turning back. There was no longer room for reconciliation or quiet settlements. The matter would be decided in court, under the unflinching gaze of law and public record. Victor struck back. Through his high-powered attorney, he filed an emergency petition claiming Amelia was mentally unstable, alleging that her accusations stemmed from delusions and a desire to seize control of family finances. The petition demanded a psychiatric evaluation and temporary control of Amelia's accounts placed under guardianship. The audacity of it left her breathless. They weren't just trying to steal her identity anymore, they were trying to erase her credibility entirely. Claire countered with ruthless efficiency. She presented the mountain of evidence Amelia had collected, from forged signatures to credit bureau reports, from Bernard's testimony to police photographs of vandalism. She filed for an emergency injunction, demanding protective orders against further harassment. For days, Amelia lived in a liminal space between dread and defiance, waiting for the court's decision. The hearing was set for early May. Amelia prepared herself with a meticulousness born of desperation. She rehearsed her testimony, memorized timelines, and annotated documents until the dates and numbers felt etched into her bones. Nathan stood by her through every preparation session, steady as bedrock. Claire drilled her with mock questions, testing her composure under pressure. "They will try to rattle you," she warned. "They will try to make you question your own memory. Do not let them." The night before the hearing, Amelia sat by her window overlooking Lake Ontario, the city lights shimmering across the dark water. She thought of her father again, of how he had once taught her to ride a bike by holding the seat lightly, letting go only when he knew she could balance on her own. She felt as though he was doing the same now, watching from somewhere unseen, trusting that she could carry herself through this trial. She whispered a promise into the night she would not falter. The courthouse in downtown Toronto was a fortress of stone and glass, its marble floors echoing with footsteps and whispered anticipation. On the morning of the hearing, Amelia walked through its doors with Nathan at her side and Claire leading the way. Her hands shook slightly, but her gaze was steady. Inside the courtroom, she saw them: Victor in a tailored suit, his expression oiled with confidence, and Lillian beside him, dressed in pale colors that made her look fragile and maternal. The sight of her mother feigning vulnerability nearly unmoored Amelia. But she forced herself to remember the inheritance file, the forged signatures, the spray-painted threats. Costumes could not erase truth. The hearing was brief but brutal. Victor's attorney painted Amelia as unstable, citing her supposed isolation, her late-night calls to Nathan, even her habit of keeping detailed journals as signs of obsession. The argument was slick, almost convincing, until Claire began her counterattack. She laid out the evidence with surgical precision, side-by-side comparisons of Amelia's genuine signatures against Victor's forgeries, sworn testimony from Bernard admitting to collusion, police photographs of the vandalized apartment and the spray-painted threats. She ended with the inheritance documents, showing funds drained into Lillian's account within weeks of Amelia's 25th birthday. The courtroom grew still. The judge leaned forward, her expression sharpening as she absorbed the weight of it all. Then, with firm clarity, she dismissed Victor's petition in its entirety. Amelia's credibility was not only preserved but bolstered. The judge issued protective orders against both Victor and Lillian, warning that further violations would carry criminal penalties. Amelia walked out of the courthouse that day with her head high. The siege was far from over. The full trial still loomed ahead, but she had survived the first assault. Her enemies had tried to brand her unstable, to strip her of her voice, but the truth had spoken louder. In the weeks that followed, Amelia doubled her efforts. She worked closely with Claire to prepare for trial, assembling timelines, witness lists, and expert testimony. She collaborated with forensic accountants who traced the fraudulent funds through shell accounts and offshore transfers. She spent long evenings in Nathan's workshop, the smell of sawdust grounding her as they strategized over mugs of coffee. Yet even as the legal battle advanced, Amelia felt the emotional toll deepen. Friends drifted away, uncomfortable with the drama. Neighbors avoided eye contact, whispering about the spectacle. Her mother's campaign of manipulation had seeded doubt in many hearts, and Amelia realized that clearing her name legally was only half the battle. The other half was reclaiming her sense of self from the shadow of shame. But she refused to yield. The siege had shown her that her enemies would stop at nothing to silence her, so she resolved to meet them with equal ferocity. If they came with lies, she would come with truth. If they came with intimidation, she would come with resilience. And if they tried to break her spirit, she would rise from every blow stronger than before. The trial was approaching. The final confrontation loomed like a storm on the horizon. Amelia could feel the air thickening with anticipation, charged with the weight of unfinished battles. She knew the next chapter would decide everything: her freedom, her future, and the reckoning of those who had betrayed her blood. The siege was not over. It was only intensifying. The first day of the trial dawned beneath a sky the color of slate, low clouds pressing heavy over Toronto. Amelia stood on the courthouse steps, her breath misting in the early morning chill, the weight of months of preparation pressing on her shoulders. Yet beneath the pressure, a strange calm had settled over her. She had endured the fracture. She had survived the siege. And now she stood ready to face the reckoning. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. Reporters whispered in the gallery, their pens poised for a scandal that blended family betrayal with financial fraud. Strangers filled the benches, drawn by the spectacle, but Amelia's focus narrowed to three figures: Victor, his face taut with defiance; Lillian, her eyes downcast, wrapped in an air of calculated fragility, and herself standing opposite them with her lawyer Claire and Nathan at her side. The opening statement set the tone. Victor's attorney painted a portrait of a dutiful stepfather and a misunderstood mother, claiming Amelia had fabricated the allegations to punish them for family disagreements. He pointed to her journals as evidence of obsession, to her isolation as evidence of instability. He spoke with confidence. But Amelia noticed the cracks in his performance, the slight hesitation when mentioning the inheritance, the avoidance of specific dates. Lies, she thought, always waver under scrutiny. Then Claire rose. Her voice was calm but edged with steel. She spoke not of vendettas or family quarrels, but of facts: forged signatures, fraudulent accounts, collusion with a loan officer, vandalism and intimidation. She framed Amelia not as a daughter seeking revenge, but as a citizen demanding justice. "This is not a family dispute," she declared. "This is a case of systematic identity theft, executed with intent, precision, and betrayal." The gallery shifted uneasily, sensing the gravity of her words. The evidence unfolded like a map of deceit. Claire presented side-by-side documents showing Amelia's genuine signature against Victor's clumsy forgeries, the differences stark under the magnifying glass of forensic analysis. She displayed emails between Victor and Bernard, instructing which signature samples to use, even mocking Amelia's childish loop in her handwriting. She revealed bank records showing funds siphoned into shell accounts tied to Lillian. Each revelation landed like a blow, dismantling the illusion Victor's attorney had tried to weave. Witnesses took the stand. Bernard, pale and sweating, confessed to his role, admitting he had overridden security protocols at Victor's insistence. His voice cracked as he described how Victor promised him a share in a future investment that never materialized. The betrayal had extended even to his accomplices. Then came the forensic accountant, tracing the stolen funds across borders, from Canadian credit lines to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The complexity of the scheme painted Victor not as a bumbling stepfather, but as a seasoned manipulator. The inheritance file followed, its neat columns showing the precise moment Lillian drained the trust fund. When asked why, she lowered her eyes and whispered about temporary needs. But the evidence spoke louder than her feigned sorrow. Through it all, Amelia sat steady, her journals open on her lap. She did not flinch when photographs of the vandalism were displayed on the courtroom screen, her apartment wall defaced with the word traitor, her car slashed, her belongings destroyed. She did not waver when voicemails of Victor's threats were played, his voice dripping with menace. Each piece of evidence was another brick in the fortress she had built, each revelation another step toward freedom. When it was Amelia's turn to testify, she rose with the weight of her father's memory steadying her. She spoke clearly, recounting the first shock in the bank, the sleepless nights, the fear of being watched, the devastation of discovering her inheritance stolen. She described the humiliation of having her credit destroyed, the jeopardy it caused for her career, the emotional toll of being painted as unstable by her own mother. Her voice wavered at times, but she did not falter. The courtroom listened in silence. Even the judge leaned forward, her eyes steady on Amelia as she spoke of resilience, of choosing to fight not just for herself, but for others who might face similar betrayals. Family should mean protection, Amelia said, her words echoing in the chamber, not exploitation. What was stolen from me wasn't only money, it was trust, safety, and the memory of a father who believed in honesty above all else. By the time she stepped down, the gallery was hushed. Claire squeezed her shoulder briefly, a silent acknowledgement that Amelia had done more than testify. She had reclaimed her voice. The defense tried to claw back ground. Victor took the stand, spinning tales of Amelia's supposed recklessness, claiming he had managed her finances out of necessity. But cross-examination stripped him bare. Claire presented his spreadsheet, the one found on his laptop, meticulously tracking Amelia's paychecks, bonuses, and travel schedule. She read aloud his own notes about intercepting her mail during business trips. His denials crumbled into stammers. The image of a caring stepfather collapsed, revealing the predator beneath. When Lillian testified, she wept softly, claiming she had been pressured by Victor. But Claire's questions cut through her performance. Why, Mrs. Cross, did the inheritance funds transfer directly into your account? Silence. Why did you keep signature samples from Amelia's childhood in your possession? More silence. The fragility dissolved, leaving complicity exposed. The trial stretched on for days, but the outcome became increasingly clear. Piece by piece, the mask of family loyalty was stripped away, replaced by the undeniable shape of calculated betrayal. The verdict came on a bright afternoon, sunlight streaming through the courthouse windows. The judge's voice was firm, deliberate. Victor was found guilty of identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Lillian was found complicit, her role acknowledged though mitigated by claims of coercion. Sentences were handed down. Victor faced a lengthy prison term, his schemes unraveled for all to see. Lillian received probation and restitution orders, her reputation in ruins. As the gavel struck, Amelia felt a wave crash over her, Not joy exactly, but release. The weight that had pressed on her since that autumn morning in the bank lifted, leaving her lighter, though scarred. She looked at Victor being led away in handcuffs, his arrogance finally broken, and at her mother, sitting small and diminished, and felt no triumph, only closure. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but Amelia kept her words simple. She spoke of justice, of the importance of speaking out, of the need to protect others from similar exploitation. She did not speak of revenge, though she felt its quiet satisfaction deep inside. The reckoning was complete. In the months that followed, Amelia rebuilt. Credit bureaus cleared her records. Her employer, once hesitant, reinstated her promotion after Claire provided evidence of her exoneration. She moved into a new apartment near the lake, filling it not with expensive furniture, but with pieces that carried meaning: her father's old desk, Nathan's handmade shelves, photographs of moments untouched by betrayal. She also began speaking publicly about her experience at community centers and universities. She shared her story, urging others to recognize the signs of financial abuse within families. Her journals became tools, not just for survival, but for education. She helped establish a fund for victims of familial fraud, ensuring others would not face the same isolation she had endured. On quiet evenings, she sat on her balcony with Nathan, watching the lake ripple under the sunset. They spoke of their father, of his laugh, his integrity, his belief in fairness. Amelia realized then that though Victor and Lillian had stolen much, they had failed to steal the most important thing: her capacity to endure, to rise, to turn pain into purpose. The fracture had nearly broken her. The siege had tested her. The reckoning had freed her. Now, standing in this aftermath, Amelia Cross no longer saw herself as a victim of identity theft. She saw herself as something far greater: a survivor, a fighter, and a voice for those still trapped in silence. And as the spring blossoms finally unfurled across Toronto, Amelia walked forward into her new life, unshackled from betrayal, armed with truth, and ready to build a future that no one could ever steal again.